Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP, Asheville 103.7, streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Davyne Dial, for managing WPVM FM, and Robin Collier for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. You can always reach me, Navé, at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled N-A-V-E. And I'd like to remind you, we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to improve your writing chops, get a little bit better at what happens on the page between you and your pen, imaginativestorm.com is a good place to go for resources that will help you do such a thing. So today I have someone I met 2 weeks ago at a little cafe in Asheville on Merriman Avenue, and she was there with Davyne Dial, who's the manager of WPVM FM. I was driving down Merriman Avenue. I saw Davyne's car. I stopped in to say hello, and Virginia Todd was there with Davyne. Davyne introduced me to Virginia, and she said, "Oh, here's Virginia. She's going to be helping us with WPVM FM radio." So in our short conversation, Virginia and I learned that we both loved radio, and that's the kind of love that invites you to participate with absolutely no agenda at all, other than the microphone is in front of you, and you love the mic, and you love the radio. So Virginia Todd, welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, and let's talk radio.
Thank you so much for having me this morning. I'm very excited to be joining you.
Let's begin. Why are you so excited about being engaged in a radio station, a community radio station? There's no money in it. There's only the joy of interacting with all of that equipment and all of the people who listen. What's up?
Well, that's plenty of payment, I think. It's such a wonderful platform for connecting with others, and it's kind of a really nice way to have people that give a reason for them to talk to me legitimately, which is nice because I will interview anyone, even at the grocery store, just talking to someone. It turns into me asking 50 questions. So I got into amateur radio first. I started about 13 years ago. I got my ham license, and that kind of got the bug started, the ability to talk to people all over the world that you've never met before and all have something in common together, which is love of community, helping each other, and being prepared for if your community needs you. So a large part of amateur radio is emergency preparedness, disaster preparedness. Through that training, I met people from all over the world who have done a lot with amateur radio in times of disaster and need to help their communities. And that kind of environment and being with people that are there for community, completely volunteer, just like community radio. To be an amateur radio operator, you do have to have an FCC license, and you're not allowed to take any money for your services. So I got into doing community events, safety events, when folks go and do all these big marathons and bicycle races, which are, very big here in Asheville. They contract with us to do the emergency services in case somebody gets hurt, and we need to do communications in some remote locations off of the parkway where cell phones and things don't work. We've been doing that. I've been doing that for about 13 years. So that kind of environment of helping each other and learning more about just a wide variety of people. And so that segued into me listening, of course, to community radio. WPVM here in Asheville has just been on my saved list for years now, and been really enjoyed listening to the programming and hearing the content. And then kind of one day, I was chatting with my father, and he goes, I don't hear a lot of the kind of music that you've been playing lately on the radio. Why don't you get on there and play what you like? That was actually why I started doing amateur radio when I was a lot younger. I thought that you could kind of pirate radio style, put music out over the airwaves, and I wouldn't have to be a DJ or anything. I could just play what I wanted. First day of class, I found out that is highly illegal. There's no transmitting of music over amateur radio frequencies. So that kind of pooped that. But once I found the opportunity, I with WPVM, I called them up and said, hey, I'm really interested in learning more about volunteering, having no idea that I could even have a show on there. And Davyne was so wonderful and getting me involved and getting me the resources that I needed in order to really just do a nice job. Yeah, that's kind of how it started. The music bug is the first bug that bit me. The people in our community is the second bug that bit me. So those two combined forces at WPVM and really just make a nice platform for sharing the essence of who I am with the community in a larger way.
So community, of course, is very broad. We're all a member of the community of humans, and then we're a member of the community within the country we live in, to the state, to the town, to the little neighborhood we're in. So as you were talking, I was thinking about amateur radio, and it sounds like from a community point of view, amateur radio and amateur radio operators create a safety net for the community, and yet the community or the communities probably have very little idea that you're out there as an amateur radio operator. I'm here with my cell phone. Maybe other people listening to this show have their cell phones and they're wondering, well, how do I connect with this? What's its purpose? So I'd like for you to explain that a little bit more for us, and then take that into the way you plan to engage with WPVM FM, because you're doing a lot more than just a show. I think you're really getting involved in it, and WPVM is really well organized, and it needs the help of someone like you. So first start with the infrastructure of amateur radio and build that out into telling us what your vision is for WPVM FM.
Absolutely. So the infrastructure around amateur radio use, thankfully in our area, we are not as susceptible to as many natural disasters, earthquakes, flooding, these types of things that some of the other areas, like I'm sure you remember Hurricane Katrina in Louisiana, they used amateur radio to coordinate the emergency services for people when cell phones were down for a very, very long time. So some of the folks that I met through amateur radio that I was most impressed with was a couple that lived in India, and they experienced some catastrophic flooding, and it was, I think, 3 years before cell phone service was even instituted back in the area. So these are very poor areas with literally millions of people. And this couple was able to organize a structure that provided consistent radio communication, taking accounts of those that have health needs, those that are missing, communicating to loved ones that have been found, supply chain, all of those things. They were the cell phone network that we rely on here. And they were doing that all with handheld radios that are run with very low wattage, very low power. And you can get into a lot of areas just contact to contact, where cell phones need to hit a tower in order to be successful. So if all the towers are down, your cell phones won't work cell phone to cell phone. Amateur radio, it will. So you can actually talk like walkie-talkies, essentially, on these frequencies, just person to person linking up. And then you get those messages across from very remote, very devastated areas to the resources that are needed. So like FEMA in our country, there's disaster preparedness, and we actually work alongside with FEMA. A lot of the services that go in, I don't know if you're familiar with Viper radios, big name that's used by police, fire department. These are like a brand name of a specific type of radio that runs on their specific frequencies so that it can't be messed with by just common public. I think it was a couple of years ago, we did an event. The Asheville police and fire were the main points of contact doing what we do. Within the first hour of the event, the Viper radio system went down and they could not use it. We jumped in immediately. We had all of our network, because this is what we practice. So we automatically know how to go in, who's the point of contact, who's running the show on what we call emergency control, that sort of thing. So we worked hand in hand with the paramedics, with fire and rescue, and we were able to restore the communications within minutes when their multi-million-dollar network failed. So that's a little taste of the people that love our community and love doing radio and then putting their powers to work for good. So that ties into WPVM is a educational and emergency broadcast. That's what our license basically is made for, is to make sure that we are someone in the community that if something happened, you can get the emergency information, you can get safety information from our stations. That is the main reason we're on. Wonderful commentary and music is almost secondary to the purpose of our license, which is to provide emergency broadcast information. So when we very first started training me and helping me learn how I could be a part of the station more, one of the biggest emphasis is that we are for the community's use. If something were to happen, they can know that they can get safe, real-time information from our station. So very important. Again, we're very blessed in our area that we don't have a whole lot of these natural disasters occurring, but certainly, as we know, in Franklin, just a couple of years ago, they were pretty well devastated by the flooding that happened there. It really can knock on our front door, and it's important to know where you can get real-time, safe information that you can count on for your family in a time of emergency. And WPVM is that.
So I'm going to ask a little bit of a naive question because I don't understand this. These frequencies exist. So you're saying we broadcast on this frequency, Viber radio has its frequency. 200 years ago, these frequencies weren't around because radio wasn't around. How do these frequencies continue to exist, and how do you access them? Where do they come from?
So the frequency has always existed. We just weren't able to tap into it with our technology. So this is atmospheric conditions that exist. Now, I'm not a super scientist on it. I learned a little bit in my class, and I'm sure someone will love to come on and tell me all the ways that I'm wrong. But from the best of my understanding, this is literally layers of the atmosphere that you're hitting. So when we're close in proximity, we can propagate. So you know about that. Antennas propagate a signal. That signal can go as far as the power that's supporting it can push it. And then the propagation is helped by the atmosphere. So the license class that I have in amateur radio, I'm just a tech. I can't hop on the big all over the world, talk to the International Space Station frequencies, but those do exist. And the higher up you go in your classification, the further essentially you can broadcast. So they break it down into license classes so that you don't really affect each other if you don't know what you're doing. And also the power issue. So we mentioned the Viper radios, those run on a frequency, and you technically can access these frequencies because it's literally just the air and the magnetism in the universe. But the FCC prevents us from doing so legally because of interruptions. So as you know, if you're driving in your car and you're driving out of range, your radio signal, you'll be on the same channel, but it might bleed into a new station when you get too far away from somewhere else. So you're just hitting their range, even though it's the same frequency. Their propagation only can go so far. So there's legalities that restrict the science, but from a strictly world standpoint, you can use a potato and a crystal and talk to somebody else because you're interacting with what's created here. We have this beautiful atmosphere and this beautiful world that runs on magnetism and love, and you get to work on that with technology, and it's really interesting and phenomenal, all the discoveries that have been made about how we can interact with our world and use the natural resources that are here to communicate. This is going to be a quick aside, but I read an article the other day that says that all of the silica in the entire world now, for every computer, every phone being made, all that silica comes from right here in Western North Carolina. And so if we think about just the natural properties of this world that we're living in, the first radio experiments you do as a Boy Scout or whatever is taking the crystal and the potato and the wire, and you can figure out how to get sound with that. Well, that's this beautiful world that we're living in, and particularly here in the mountains of Western North Carolina, we are incredibly blessed with the rich natural resources in their raw form that are used in all of this very high-tech and advanced communication.
So these frequencies have been here all along, and you're saying scientifically we discovered them as radio emerged. Do we know all of the frequencies, or are there others yet to be discovered?
I'm sure there are. Everything works on RF signals. Even you and I probably put off some form of radio frequency waves. I'm probably not going to quote the right science here, but anyway, RF frequencies are used in healing. They're used in, you can even break up your kidney stones with the right frequency waves and things like that. So they're used in medicine. They're used in a lot of meditation. I'm sure you see on YouTube, or there's all kinds of videos that say healing sound 423 hertz or whatever it is, and it's playing this hum for hours to kind of try to recalibrate people's systems. So our bodies and that of the entire world, we're subject to these radio frequencies, which is one reason that you hear about people being concerned about the bees and things like that, getting their natural systems interrupted by all these frequencies and the higher rates and all that. And same with like the whales in the ocean, sonar is affecting them. Our world already has these systems that are created that we are not, I don't believe, fully aware of enough to interact with them in a way that is conscious and safe for the greater world, not just humanity. I think that we approach radio frequency from a very anthropocentric standpoint, and I think that's leaving out a whole lot more that could be discovered.
Which makes me think about bird migration. Mm-hmm. The birds must be aware of these frequencies and are able to perhaps communicate or at least sense the frequencies and somehow use those as directional opportunities to get them from point A to point B over the thousands and thousands of miles of a migration.
Mm-hmm. That's true. I think most species probably use it, whether we pick up on it or not. And those types of understandings could be used to really enhance human communication if we were to pay attention to the world outside of us. I don't know how hokey this is going to sound, but I think telepathy works on those levels as well. So it's just a matter of how in touch or how internalized we are in our own selves. I think whether we're open to learning and absorbing from nature and what's around us, or I'm going to access radio frequencies through a metallic or plastic device versus my own natural radio that's in between my ears that I was given. And our heart, even works on electrical pulses. So all that to tie into saying why I believe music is so important and why I believe that sound and voice therapy, all of these things go into our physiology and being healthy or not. Essentially, what we are, what we eat, and that includes what we listen to and what we visualize and what we imagine.
It's interesting as you talk, because I completely buy the idea that we could broadcast telepathically from one person to another. And why not? Mm-hmm. We are powerful. There's a great deal of difference in the kind of human electromagnetic power we have and what our cell phones have. And yet we do give a lot of respect to the plastic device and less respect to the human device. And mm-hmm. I'm thinking we're talking also about the collective consciousness. And the other thing that came to mind as you were speaking, years ago, people denied bacteria and they denied viruses because they couldn't see them. Oh, that can't possibly be there. I couldn't be sick because of something on the counter I can't see. Perhaps that same inclination to deny the unseen in regards to these radio frequencies, I think that might be at play as well. I can't see it, so it couldn't possibly be real that we could communicate person to person over these frequencies. It's impossible. And yet, I think we do it within the collective consciousness. That may be how this group over here gets an idea, and 100 miles away or 1,000 miles away, the same group gets it at the same time.
I'm a firm believer in that. And I think it has a lot to do with object permanence mixed with instant gratification. I can hold the cell phone and I can see it, I can visualize it, I can feel it. It must be real, right? Even though this is just a collection of atoms, just like I am. Yeah, like you said, it's the credence given to our bodies as those transceivers. I think because that is very hand in hand with spirituality. And I think that's a big reason why people don't pay attention to it, because then you have to acknowledge that there is beyond just what you created in your own mind for yourself. And whatever you want to attribute that, I personally say the creator. However you say, I think that it's undeniable that we live within our own self and we affect those around us. I've had many, many times where I could be thinking something, and then I realized that what I was thinking affected the people around me. And I think negativity, negative thoughts, even if we're just poisoning ourselves with them, those affect everything within our realm, our animals, our plants, the air that we breathe. We are not an individual in an individual world. That's really, really important. And I think communication, and the more we exercise that, the bigger that opens and the more accessible it becomes for people. So that's my underlying mission with my show and everything on the radio, even if it's just topical. Still, we are what we eat, we are what we ingest. And my ears need to have things that are going to help me grow and be open, not negative and judgmental or any of the toxic traits.
On the subject of music and singing and the beautiful sounds of the universe, you said the creator, and that's how you refer to this entity that's beyond us, we can't see in those frequencies. As you were saying, the creator, one of the things that occurred to me as you said it, often refer to the creator as well. It implies there was a beginning. The creator started it all. I've come to think that there was no beginning, there's no end, it's infinity. So the creator is creating constantly. This universe that we're in, this infinity we're in, is constantly making itself anew over and over and over again. And I love that, because in that circularity rises all of the sounds that we hear on Earth. And I imagine if you go to other planets, you'll have different configurations, but there would be similar vibrations all over the universe. So for you, your relationship to music, your relationship to sound, to the beauty around you. If you love music, you must love beauty. How did that start for you as a child? And how do you engage it now? And tell us more about spin class. You're spinning the disc, the old analog vinyl. I know what you're up to. So tell us. And I see your face is so happy when you think about these things. So make us happy too.
Thank you. Music is an integral part of my life. I consider music just as important as spoken language. I've been in a musical family, not that we play music, but we play the radio dial really good. I grew up just constantly listening to a little bit of everything. And my earliest memories are of the giant old stacks of these very, very large speakers, 5 of them in the living room, and just the entire house being open with the doors open, the windows open. You can hear it in the neighborhood, and you are in the music, not just the music's playing in the room. You are in the music. And that is how I grew up. If you're at my house, it is loud and it's on and you're existing within it, not necessarily that you're listening to it. You are part of it. And that's kind of how I feel with the radio show, in the sense of music makes you feel, music helps to process, music, even just on a physiological level. I'm sure you've seen the studies that have been done with sound waves and their reaction to water and rice and whatever the different things are that have been measured. Firm believer in our physiology is subject to our unseen environment, not the unseen environment subject to our physiology. The physicality is a secondary function of spirituality, in my understanding. And music plays a huge role in that. Because just like with any art form, and I grew up in a house of artists. Both my parents are glass blowers, metal artists. You may be familiar with like the Flatiron sculpture downtown. My dad made that. So we're just in a very artistic household, and music has been a huge part of that, I think, because it helps to expand consciousness and understanding, and it gives you more feeling than just hearing a story, because you get to feel the frequencies behind the sound waves as the story's being expressed. And as you know, words can express a lot, and also these other instruments and sound and singing, all of those have added layers of feeling and vibration outside of just the composure of the words. Poetry is one part of it, but there's also a lot to be felt from songs that have no words and just have a beat or a certain vibration. And that is something that I try to take into account too. I'm not going to play metal music. I'm not going to play angry music, because that's what I'm eating. That's what I'm feeding my soul, is those sounds. It's very important to me to be picky and to play not always happy. It doesn't always have to be happy music, but it needs to be thoughtful and heartfelt and real, I guess. I'm not sure how to say it, but music is there to make us feel a certain way, and it can shape our physical as well. Sound therapy has been really incredible for people with depression and with cancer and all types of things, because you can literally change the structure of your body by the sounds and the intentions that you take in and that you apply to yourself. As I mentioned, physiology is secondary to spirituality. There was a study done by a Japanese scientist where they took bottles of water and they labeled them with different labels: ugly, hate you, you're stupid. And then there was some that said, you're beautiful, you are loved, accept you, whatever the words were. And then they played music to some, very chaotic sounds versus some like more classical. There was a lot of different nuances in the experiment. And what they found at the end was the crystal structure of the water at a microscopic level. The chaotic ones that had words of hatred pasted on them, words that were spoken to these literally bottles of water. Okay. And they looked at the crystal structure, and the ones that had the negative were all jagged and none of them went together and they were ugly. And then the ones that were spoken to with love and peace and played more cohesive sounds, those had these beautiful structures that were more like these snowflakes, and had beautiful patterns. And we are 70% at least water. If we have hateful thoughts of ourselves, if we have negative thoughts of others, that's affecting our water and their water, just in the simplest way.
I've heard that story before. I've never experimented with it, but I have experienced both labels personally. People who really love me, I have a certain sense of joy when that happens. I'm sure my configuration inside, my cellular structure changes, and those people that are negative toward me, that also creates a certain feeling inside. Now, as you were talking, and you mentioned love and frequencies, and I want to ask you a question about love of music. When you think back over the musical history of America and or of the world, do you have songs that are old, recorded in the 30s or the 40s, something that you feel really good about when you hear it played, something old? Like I'm thinking of some of the old band tunes that I used to hear like Benny Goodman and some of those.
Yeah. And like the Carter family comes to mind for me, some of the earliest recordings of like American folk music and, early country music. Absolutely. And I think back to that type of music because, now everything is so accessible. But before we had oral history and oral songs, and, you might have a songbook, but that didn't mean anybody knew how to read it or how to write music. A lot of times that type of classical education came with a wealthier background. Music, of course, is the most accessible thing for all classes and all ranges of life. So I think about that earlier music more in the sense of how to create community, how to pass time, how to remember things. It's an excellent historical book of oral history. And then also thinking of earlier than that, maybe even like war drums. Music and sound is used to cue into whatever's going on in the community and to share messages and document ways of life and periods of time. So yeah, I would say that type of music really affects me a lot. Some of the earlier recordings and things, even if it's not done with the types of recording that can pick up on a lot of the nuances of sound and things like we have now. But the words and the intentions behind it still exist, whether it comes across musically or not.
You said your father made the iron. That iron is downtown. It's a huge, very famous sculpture. Everybody stops by and has a picture taken of it. Lots of selfies of your father's iron. You grew up around here. Is that how you are so connected to the musical traditions of Western North Carolina?
Yeah, I'm from here, born and bred. So, and just a quick aside, one of my favorite things about the iron is that it's a hub for the buskers because it's this visual piece. you have everyone coming there to perform. And so we have just an incredible hub of talent here in Asheville, people that come from all over and are from here that are street performers. That's one of my favorite things about it, is that this is the free, unscheduled stage in town, is the sculpture, and everybody wants to be on it. And I just think that's wonderful. And it ties in so perfectly with the station. It ties in perfectly because I feel like every time I'm at WPVM, I have to pass 5 buskers to even just get to the station. And I can usually see 2 or 3 of them from the window there. And I just can't think of a better spot. It's a good home for music, and WPVM is just right in the middle of it. So,
well, the reason I'm asking about your background and asking if you are a native North Carolinian, I am too. I grew up in Western North Carolina. I was born here, and my generation is different than yours. I was born in 1949, and I grew up in Asheville in the 50s and the 60s. And I remember when Asheville was a very quiet, sleepy town. And in the 50s, actually, in all fairness to Sleepy, Asheville was quite vital. When I was a little boy, we would go downtown to shop at JCPenney's and Woolworths, and we would go to the Imperial Theater. And at Christmas, it was quite festive. So there were lots and lots of shops. Many of the shops were owned by local people. And I don't remember the names really so much, but just lots and lots of locally owned shops. So I have a very fond memory of growing up in Asheville. And my father was an Appalachian musician. So I played guitar and strummed behind him, and all of the old classic characters who would go to Westgate parking lot where Earth Fair is now and play into the wee hours of the night and gathered around their trucks after the Bascom-Lunsford musical holiday that was held once a year. So when you were growing up, what time frame did you grow up in, and what do you remember about growing up in Asheville?
Well, I got started in the 90s, so a little different. I think that maybe when I was growing up, there was just a little bit of lull right before we really took off as a very well-marketed tourist hub. The River Arts District wasn't really a thing yet. Really not a whole lot going on in the downtown. When I was younger, I remember a whole lot more of stuff being shuttered up, on Lexington and things like that. And the Grove Arcade wasn't done yet. They were still doing a lot of work on really all of downtown to start bringing it up and doing restoration. And the urban trail was, I think, one of the bigger things that I remember starting my, knowing about the art scene here in Asheville. And then I feel like I've seen over at least the last 20 years, so much more cohesion in our marketing as a tourism spot. So we've always had great food. We've always had great music and great places and beautiful scenery. However, the cohesiveness of the package, I think, is really coming around nicely. The River Arts District is my favorite thing to happen, as same with the Greenway and Blueway. I mean, I know you've seen the change in the river. The industry has changed. It's gotten a lot cleaner. We have a whole lot more community spaces, I think, than we did when I was growing up. It's really turning into a nice place. My family has a rich history here. Dad's side of the family is mostly from South Carolina, and my mom's side, Virginia. After Civil War, some on my mom's side, they founded Valhalla, the town down a little bit further south here. And then after the Civil War, most everyone came up from Charleston and got some property over near the airport. So that side of the family has been here for more than 100 years. And my great uncle, who recently passed away, but I got to know him very well, and he had an incredible memory. He passed away at 92, just a year or so back. And he grew up here when Highway 25 was literally a gravel road. And there was one doctor, Doc Russell, that lived out in Arden, and you had to go to his house if you were sick. And people still drove wagons, back in the 20s when they were here. So he lived here in Western North Carolina through the Great Depression and spoke a lot about the changes through town because he grew up when it was booming and then saw it crash as well. So that is very interesting to hear about because he has so many great stories of what town looked like. He's got a lot of old pictures and articles and things that I inherited from the Asheville Times back in the 30s and 40s. Thankfully, a lot of our architecture has survived. I read an interesting article the other day that was talking about how because of the Depression, Asheville was in a great amount of debt from all the buildings that had already been built. So they chose, instead of mowing down all the buildings and reinvesting and spending more money in infrastructure, which is what a lot of cities did to recover during the Great Depression, they chose to just buckle down and pay off their debt, which I think finally got paid off like in the 60s or something for all these buildings. But that being said, we are left with these incredible Art Deco places, just like the WPVM studio is in a building from the 20s that is just spectacular. So we have a lot of really great architecture and history, and particularly around radio as well. So like the Flatiron, I'm sure you're familiar. Davyne was telling me about this, and I ended up learning more. The Flatiron building that's now being converted into the hotel, that was the very first radio station in town, and I didn't even know that, and I'm from here. We have a really rich history in Asheville of music and of culture. And we've been a hub all the way through from 1800s to now, which is fantastic. And to see that a lot of those places still exist and are still helping our music scene and tourism thrive is just like, that's a wonderful thing to be part of.
It's a very interesting story for sure. You say you were born in the 90s. Is that correct? You were early 90s?
93, yeah.
You were 93. You appeared in Asheville. Well, the reason I am so intrigued by that number, in 1992, Alan Wolf, Ginger West, Lee Lancaster, and I were the core members of the Asheville Poetry Slam at the Green Door on Carolina Lane a year before you were born. So the year you were born, the Poetry Slam in Asheville was getting well underway. And by 1994, when you were 2 years old, just past being a toddler, we held the first National Poetry Slam Championships here in Asheville. And Asheville was one of the centers of gravity for the spoken word movement in America. And even to this day, I'm still around. A lot of people who were there became legends. Patricia Smith is considered Robert Frost level poet now and highly respected around the country, as well as many of the other slammers. The reason why I'm telling this story is because guess what? Last night at the River Arts District, a friend of mine said, there's a poetry slam going on at the River Arts District, the Beast of the Mountains.
Yeah.
And I'm like, whoa. Now, I've been involved in the Poetry Slam for years. I run the Poetry Slam at the Leaf Festival. It's $1,000 prize slam, professional level. Poets come from all over, big audience. And I hosted in the way that we hosted the slam back when you were 2 years old. Or
That's
back when you were
amazing.
born.
Yeah.
You were getting born. We were performing poetry at the Green Door when you were being born and crying in the crib, right? I went in there last night, exquisitely organized. The people who were running it were just as lively and active and thoughtful and artistic and experimental and welcoming and just fun-loving as a group could be. And I was amazed and thrilled to think, wow, this is still going on. And it had a lot of the remnants of the early days. The folks there had no idea who I was when I walked in. Not that I'm that important, but I did represent that earlier time. And I said, well, do you know who came up with the phrase, the points are not the point is poetry? No, we know that. That's one of the themes of the slam. I said, Alan Wolf started it right here. And they said, yeah, and next Tuesday we're leaving to go to Florida to the Southern Fried Poetry Championships. And I said, do you know where that came from? No. I said, Alan Wolf and Asheville thought of the Southern Fried Poetry Arena, being Southern, of course. And now the national level poetry group it's fallen apart. So Southern Fried is now the national organization by default. So last night at the River Arts District, I went there and people were your age, in their 20s and their 30s. That's when people really gain traction. And I was so pleased to see that and to think, I played a little bit of a part here. And it was just so incredibly vital. And I love that because it was spoken word and music. And the MC was, I think the MC may have been from California or someplace. Fantastic timing, uptake, quick, the whole thing. So it's really a beautiful thing to connect with you from two different generational points of view. I'm probably your father's age, or maybe even a little older, but still, we're one generation, you're another. So, with that, and as we move toward the time that we have to say goodbye, I want you to tell me what your vision is regarding WPVM FM. And as I speak with you, I think this is the right person to grab hold of WPVM FM and take it wherever it can go. It's a beautifully well organized operation right now. Thank you, Davyne Dial. Couldn't be better. But Davyne's in my group. You're the new group. You're the power source. You're the frequency that we need to broadcast on. So what are you going to do? How you plan it?
Just quickly, your story and tying in the multi-generations reminds me of what we were speaking on earlier about that collective consciousness. And even though you weren't the one to go and directly tell those people how to get into poetry, they were on the same wavelength as you from what you already generated and started. So I'm kind of on that same vibe with Davyne. She has generated and created this incredible platform and poured all of this energy into it and really had it take flight. And now that it has, the other energies that are attracted to this platform are taking hold and wanting to be a part of it, because community collaboration is the heart of radio, and communications in general is community collaboration. There's no radio can exist in a vacuum. And so we have to be able to be open to each other's stories and sharing. And I think the heart and the love of community is the driving force, because we can have fancy marketing plans and fundraising plans and all these things, but it has to be able to resonate with the community and with the heart of others. If I step into any situation from a standpoint of love and openness, it's going to be a successful place, because we're all drawn to each other on a subconscious, invisible level based on our love and care for the community that we're in. So it's subject matter or music or any particular show, they're all cohesive because they have the same feelings underneath of, we love this, we love each other, we want to provide that love out into the community and broadcast that. I see radio frequencies in colors. We have a responsibility to make sure that what we're pumping out is healthy and good and a nice shade of pink as opposed to anything else, and we don't need that shade of green. It doesn't need to be in money, because money is secondary to the heart. And so that's really, I think, the underlying and the biggest lesson that I think Davyne keeps helping me to hold up is that it's about the heart first, the community first, and then everything will be taken care of from that. I'm not sure how to say direction-wise, because it all will stem from that. I think the creativity is so in multi areas, as far as music, spoken word, interview, public service announcements, just basic things in our community, the vitals of our community. And I think making sure that each of those points are covered, all of those tie into the collective heart and consciousness of Asheville and the greater world, because we all care about those things. And if we make sure that they're all well represented from a standpoint of refinement and good intentions and heart, then that's a recipe for success.
So to close, tell us just a little bit about your show, Spin Class, and how we can listen to it. I'd love to hear it. Is it on multiple platforms? Do you just air it on WPVM FM and do it once a week and let it go at that? What's happening with that?
Yeah. So I just started in March. So I don't even know what I really want to do other than just sharing over the airwaves. I just do it on WPVM. I have a show page, Spin Class, on WPVMFM.org /spin/class. I've got an Instagram at Spin Class Radio. And the focus of my show, I do mostly contemporary, alternative, independent music artists. And my focus is people that are coming to Asheville. So they don't necessarily have to be from Asheville. Being from here, it was kind of embarrassing to look at like the marquee for the Orange Peel or the Gray Eagle. And I have no idea who any of these names are. And I can't imagine, if I don't know, most other people might not either. So I just thought it'd be a good place to start start by highlighting content that's already coming here, giving people a taste of some of these names that we don't know, as well as maintaining the platform that WPVM already has established for local artists and busker community as well. So it's really important to me to make sure that we maintain that platform and that Asheville people get a place, and even non-Asheville people. We have a lot of street performers that come from all over to take advantage of the community that we have here in Asheville, and making sure that that's supported and giving back that love that everyone is pouring out freely on the streets or wherever they are, and making that available for a wider audience. So WPVMFM.org, and then I stream. Of course, you stream from the WPVM platform. You can download the app, and I'm every Friday from 2 to 5.
Well, Virginia, thank you so much for taking the time out of your morning to be with us on Twice 5 Miles Radio, and I will air this on WPVM FM. I believe my show is 9 o'clock on Friday, so I may just come just before you, I think. Did you say you were on? Yeah, so you follow my show, is that correct?
Yes, it's a very hard act to follow, but we do our best there at Spin Class.
Oh, come on, give me a break. Thank you, Virginia, and I'm glad that you're part of WPVM FM. It gives me some hope. I've been worried that we wouldn't be able to find somebody with the kind of fire. It's one thing to have a spark. It's another thing to have the fire burning in the belly.
Thank you. I appreciate your time. It's been wonderful getting to know you more. I appreciate you very much.
So there you go, my friends. Thus concludes my conversation with Virginia Todd. I hope you learned something about what it means to be an amateur radio operator. I was particularly pleased to learn about all the frequencies and how we can connect to them and how they've been there forever, and how a radio wave can go way, 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 way out in space, and it gets picked up and bounces and bounces and bounces. Don't usually think of that when you think of radio. Certainly these days, when I'm streaming most of the radio I consume, I don't think of it. I love to stream podcasts. I listen to lots of podcasts. I stream WPVM FM. I also stream WNYC out of New York. Both radio stations are my favorites. So if you are inclined to listen to the radio, you really don't need a radio tuner anymore. You can just plug it into whatever device you have and off you go. Listen to all kinds of content coming from everywhere. And it's exciting to think the radio, which has been around a long, long time, still endures, still recreates itself. The audio possibilities are still available to us. I know some podcasts I listen to, almost like radio theater, are fantastic. Sound effects, all kinds of vocal characterizations, different kinds of accents. This fellow I know named Steve Shell produces a show called The Old Gods of Appalachia, and it's based out of Asheville. Steve and a group of actors produce it. They also tour the show as a radio show, radio theater, and they sell houses out, 500,000 seats sold out, to listen to these people present these really odd stories about the Appalachian hills back in the day, or even in the current time. And it's a blend of stories, mostly fiction, some based on the historical narratives that have come down through the ages. It's all about the magical weirdness of the mountains, the people that may have existed, the people who were murderers, the people who were bandits, the people who were the good preachers, the bad preachers. And Steve does it in a fantastic Appalachian accent, which I can't really create like he does, although I did grow up around the Appalachian accent and do in a lot of ways have it. But I can't do it as a character. He really can drop into it and say things like, I'm a-coming down the road now, and I want you all to take care of yourselves before I get here, because once I get here, you're going to have to take care of me. I'm maybe not doing it justice, and I like to play around with it. I don't know if that's an Appalachian accent or not. It's my version of what I think an Appalachian accent is, which brings me around to something that's been very interesting for me. One of the things the group does in Old Gods of Appalachia, they sing a lot. There's a lot of music. And one of the things that I've always regretted about my life, and I've never been able to figure out, I don't hear music in my head. So I'm not able to recreate or create an Appalachian accent accurately. I don't hear it. It's a bit like not having sight or not having hearing or being colorblind. Not having sight, not having hearing, being colorblind. If you're colorblind, you see vague colors, but no vivid colors like red or purple or green or yellow. When you have no sight, and you can easily not have sight by closing your eyes, when you close your eyes, or if you are denied sight for many different reasons, there's nothing there. You can feel that your other senses become much more acute, and yet you can't see anything. I have that problem regarding sound in my head. I cannot create sound in my head. I don't hear it. It's like being in an empty room with not any sound at all. So it's a very interesting thing when it comes to recreating an accent. Now, I can hear myself speaking. I can listen to the audio, and I know that I'm speaking, and I can understand what I'm saying, and I can hear what I'm talking. But I can't hear what I'm saying in my head. I can listen to the audio and hear what I've said. I hear it coming out of my mouth, but I don't have it in my head. Once in a while, something does pop through. It happens on rare occasions, and when it does, I'm really surprised. I'm almost startled. My goodness, something popped through. I don't know what that was. So it's really interesting thinking about radio, thinking about why I'm drawn to radio, thinking about why other people are drawn to it. And I may be drawn to radio because it's a way of me almost hearing something in my head. It's so external, and yet it's so important for me to take those sounds in. It's almost like I take them in and they disappear. I get them as ideas. I'll get them as images. I'm able to see 3 dimensions. When I remember a room, almost all my senses are engaged when I remember a room. I can almost smell it, see the people in it. I can see the colors in the room, feel the textures of the curtains, the cloth on the chairs, maybe the way the rug feels on my feet. So I'm able to hear through my ears, but I have no hearing in my head. But even though I don't have the hearing in my head, I can still hear people when they speak. I love it when people say things to me and when I'm able to say things back to them. Something really delightful about that. So I hope you did enjoy Virginia's overview of Asheville. Some of my stories I told about Asheville back in the early days of the Poetry Slam. I think it is incredible thinking about Virginia being a young baby when we were first starting the Poetry Slam, and now she's taking over the roles. As my friend Kevin Cannon in Taos always says, please, really, that's just what we do. So we do take our places in the world. We do cover what we need to cover. And we do make radio. We make all kinds of things. So whatever it is you're making out there, I hope you do more of it, because the world will certainly appreciate it, and those people around you will. I know I really like it when somebody makes something and shows me what they've done. Here, look at this. Take a look at what I did yesterday. And I lean into it and enjoy whatever it is they're presenting. So I hope you do the same. And on that note, I'd like to say thank you for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville heard all over the world, and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Davyne Dial, thank you for managing WPVM FM in Asheville, North Carolina on Wall Street. And Robin Collier, thank you for managing Cultural Energy Radio, KCEI, in Taos, New Mexico. I do appreciate both of you and all that you do. Wouldn't be able to do what I do if you weren't there doing what you do. And I'd like to say, if you'd like to reach me, Navé at jamesnavé.com, Navé spelled Nave. I would love to hear from you. I don't get many emails. I've been curious about that. So maybe if you are out there listening and you just want to drop an email to me, I would be very pleased to get it. Tell me what's going on in your life. And I'd also like to remind you that we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a good place to start to do that. We host a free Imaginative Storm Writing Prompt of the Week workshop every Thursday on Zoom at 6 p.m. Eastern Time, 4 p.m. Mountain Time. We spend an hour on the call. It's not very long. So if you're interested in doing some generative, imaginative writing work, my email, as I've already said, is navé at jamesnavé.com. Be glad to send you the information. All you have to do is send me an email and I'll send you the Zoom link. And so that's it, my friends. We've reached the end of our time together. I'm glad you took some time out of your day to listen to this show. I really appreciate that. And I hope you do come back very soon. Till then, maybe I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.